Call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 146, the House of Commons Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates. Just a reminder, everyone in the room today, to keep your headsets away from your microphones so we can protect the hearing of our very valued interpreters. We welcome Ms. Paquette and Mr. Lawrence White from PSPC. One of you has an opening statement for 5 minutes. Go ahead, Ms. Paquette.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered today on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. My name is Joëlle Paquette, and I am the Acting Associate Assistant Deputy Minister of the Procurement Branch. Joining me today is Clinton Lawrence White, Director General of Procurement Assistance Canada, which offers direct support to businesses on how to participate in federal procurement. Le gouvernement du Canada s'est engagé à assurer la réconciliation.
The Government of Canada is committed to economic reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, and as part of this commitment, will continue to promote increased opportunities for First Nations, Inuit, and Métis participation and inclusion through the federal procurement process.
Thank the committee for inviting us today to speak on Public Services and Procurement Canada's efforts to deliver on its Indigenous procurement commitment to award a minimum of 5% of the total value of PSPC contracts to Indigenous businesses by the end of fiscal year 2024-2025. Mr. Chair, I want to highlight that this is a government target where the Treasury Board Secretariat, or TBS, and Indigenous Services Canada, or ISC, play essential and distinct roles. It is essential for PSPC to follow the rules set by both organizations in its effort to meet the 5% target. TBS is responsible for setting Government of Canada policies, and on this file have provided clear direction that what counts towards the 5% are contracts with firms that are included on the Indigenous Business Directory. Service aux Autochtones Canada est chargé de...
Indigenous Services Canada, on the other hand, is responsible for implementing and advising on the procurement strategy for Indigenous businesses, business program, including verifying the eligibility of businesses receiving contracts under PSIB.
Sorry, Ms. Paquette. Mr. Bachrach, go ahead.
Sorry for interrupting. I'm having some difficulty with translation. I don't know if anyone else who's joining remotely is having the similar difficulty. I see Mrs. Block nodding.
Yeah, it's clear in person, but yeah, you're right, Mrs. Block is as well. Ms. Atwin, Mr. Rogers, how are you with the translation? Okay. Why don't we'll just pause for a couple seconds. We'll check it out. One moment, please. We'll just suspend for a second. Apologies for the delay. Ms. Paquette, you're welcome to start at the beginning, just so, or continue.
I will continue, but I'll start where the paragraph I was at. That works. Service aux Autochtones Canada.
Indigenous Services Canada, on the other hand, is responsible for implementing and advising on the procurement strategy for Indigenous business program, including verifying the eligibility of businesses receiving contracts under PSIB and maintaining the integrity of the Indigenous Business Directory.
ISC is responsible for the PSIB's eligibility criteria, including verifying, certifying, and auditing Indigenous businesses listed on the IBD, thus ensuring that only firms that are entitled to these contracts receive them. ISC continues to actively work with Indigenous partners to co-develop a new transformative Indigenous procurement strategy that will improve procurement policies, safeguards, and processes for Indigenous businesses. Conformément à la directive du Conseil du
As per the Treasury Board Directive on the Management of Procurement, PSPC is responsible for developing operational tools to support procurement undertaken on behalf of other government departments, such as guidance, templates, and standard contract clauses. This responsibility includes developing tools to assist the Government of Canada.
I have to stop you there. It's not working for those of us joining remotely. The sound
Okay.
quality is quite terrible.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Bachrach. Sorry, Ms. Block, how is it for you? Has it gotten bad again?
Yes, what it sounds like is the French and the English are competing with one another. It's we're hearing both. One is a little softer than the other, but it's
I'm getting
also
nods.
getting louder
I'm getting
and
nods all
softer.
around. Same with Mrs. Vignola. We'll suspend the game for a few moments and see if we can fix this. Thanks. apologize for the delay. We think we had the IT stuff straightened out. We're going to blame it on Zoom, apparently, for the update. Ms. Paquette, we'll go back to you. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Conformément à la directive
As per the Treasury Board Directive on the Management of Procurement, PSPC is responsible for developing operational tools to support procurement undertaken on behalf of other government departments, such as guidance, templates, and standard contract clauses. This responsibility includes developing tools to assist the Government of Canada in its effort to increase participation of Indigenous businesses in federal procurement.
in fiscal year 2022 2023, PSPC awarded 2.7%, or $139 million, of the total value of its procurements to Indigenous businesses. And in fiscal year 2023 2024, PSPC awarded 3.4%, or $143 million, of the total value of its procurement to Indigenous businesses. As PSPC has not met its objective, various ongoing and planned activities are underway to progress and sustain the 5% target. The department has undertaken extensive engagement initiatives with Indigenous partners to highlight Indigenous procurement opportunities and outline the support available through Procurement Assistance Canada. Au cours de l'exercice 2023,
During the 2023-2024 fiscal year, PSPC, through Procurement Assistance Canada, hosted or took part in over 524 events tailored towards enabling Indigenous-owned and led businesses to participate in federal procurement. We participated in 4 Indigenous business information sessions that brought together Indigenous businesses, communities, and associations to increase Indigenous participation in federal procurement and highlight Indigenous procurement opportunities and support available through Government of Canada programs and services.
PAC's outreach and engagement efforts continue to support Indigenous businesses and communities by helping them understand federal procurement and the opportunities available. PAC also participates in various remote community events, helping spread awareness and support to Indigenous communities throughout Canada with the goal to support economic development. PAC also assists Indigenous communities with navigating the procurement process and sharing tools available to Indigenous groups. PAC also partnered with the Nunavut Economic Development Association for a mentorship program. This program is focused on Inuit business owners interested in federal procurement. Ces efforts concrets de sensibilisation
These concrete outreach efforts will enable PSPC to drive economic reconciliation, create jobs in Indigenous communities, develop the expertise and skill sets needed for their success, and foster the next generation of Indigenous entrepreneurs from coast to coast to coast.
I don't think we can proceed with this meeting given the sound challenges. It's just completely untenable.
Okay, let
And
me.
so for those of us joining remotely, which is most of us,
Yeah.
I can't see how we're going to possibly get through this with any semblance of participation. So I just
appreciate
wanted to
that,
register
Mr.
my
Backrack.
frustration.
Yeah, I'm going
Chair,
to.
just on that point of order, I could hear totally fine.
Yeah.
So I don't know if the challenges are different or if perceptions
We are
different,
going
but-
to suspend again, and we are going to check it again. Sorry, everyone. Just bear with us. We'll suspend. it all settled with the IT. So we're going to go back to Ms. Paquette. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And actually, I was done with my opening remarks. Thank you. Merci.
The longest 40-minute, 5-minute opening remarks. Well, thanks for your patience with us. We're going to start with Mr. Genuis for 6 minutes, please. Go ahead, sir.
Mr. Brock first, and then to me.
Mr. Brock. You're on mute, Mr. Brock.
Well, here we go again. Another day, another NDP Liberal financial scandal, this time a contracting fried supply chain. What is the total value of misappropriated funds under the Indigenous procurement system?
I do not have that information, and you would have to actually refer to Indigenous Services Canada. We are working on the 5% related to PSPC's targets.
The Assembly of First Nations testified that there are a number of shell companies securing government contracts in the Indigenous procurement program. How many shell companies has the government detected and identified?
Again, I think you would have to direct that question to Indigenous Services Canada, who are responsible for the IBD.
To your knowledge, is ISC actually looking into the number of shell companies?
I am not familiar with their activities, sorry.
To your knowledge, has ISC or anyone at PSPC made any referrals to the RCMP?
I am not aware.
How many cases has PSPC identified in which a company hires an Indigenous person simply to gain access to federal contracts through the Indigenous procurement program?
Again, that is a program that is held by the Indigenous Services Canada, and they would be the ones identifying, not PSPC.
Chair, I'm ceding the rest of my time to Mr. Genuis.
Thank you, Chair. The AFN has said, as my colleague mentioned, that most of the companies receiving Indigenous set-asides are actually shell companies. That's according to the AFN. Do you agree with their findings?
I would not be able to provide that information, or will I?
Yeah, but you're sorry to jump in. You're the procurement department, though. You're responsible for overseeing government procurement. This is a very serious allegation from one of the leading Indigenous organizations in the country. Do you have an opinion on it at all?
I do not have an opinion, and I would refer you to request that question to the Indigenous Services Canada.
Okay, that's very striking. Most of the companies are shell companies, according to this program, and you're responsible for procurement, and you don't have an opinion either way. The government uses its own deeply flawed Indigenous business list rather than relying on criteria and lists developed by Indigenous organizations. Why is that?
That is the rules that we are bound by, and those rules are set by Indigenous Services Canada as well as the Treasury Board Secretariat of Canada.
But why is it that that you develop your own list instead of working with Indigenous organizations and relying on lists they develop? Is there a policy rationale that you're aware of?
I am not aware of that. That is a responsibility of the Indigenous Services Canada. And we are bound by those rules, and we are working on how we can actually increase Indigenous.
So can I just clarify then? They make all the rules, and you make none of the rules with respect to how you define what is an Indigenous company or what is or is not a shell company. Do you have you don't have any role whatsoever? You're saying?
No, we do not. That is the Indigenous Services Canada's responsibility to develop those definitions.
How come you're responsible for procurement for everything except Indigenous procurement then?
We are responsible for procuring and trying to increase the Indigenous participation in procurement, but the rules related to the IBD are not ours, and the rules to the PSIB is not ours.
Fraud prevention in a general sense, is fraud prevention part of your role?
Not in the Indigenous Services Canada IBD. They are the ones that are doing the audits and the validation of those companies.
It's bizarre to me then that you are the procurement department. Presumably, you're supposed to have some expertise on this area, and yet you're taking none of the responsibility in the particular case of Indigenous procurement. I want to ask as well, the way to prevent shell companies from giving all of the work to non-Indigenous companies is to have subcontracting requirements. And that's why the rules require that a certain proportion of subcontracts under the Indigenous set-aside go to Indigenous companies. Are these subcontracting rules enforced?
So there are various ways for us to actually increase Indigenous participation in our contracts. One of them is for the prime
Sorry,
contractor.
very limited time. Can you answer the specific question? The 1/3 subcontract rule, is it enforced?
But in what context do you want that? Like if there is an
When
Indigenous
an Indigenous
requirement.
company ma'am, it's very simple. When an Indigenous company receives a contract under a set aside, they are required to have 1/3 of their subcontracts be Indigenous companies. It appears that there is no tracking of this. Very simple question. Is this 1/3 subcontract rule enforced? Yes or no?
That would be enforced by Indigenous Services Canada.
Is it being enforced right now? Or you don't know?
They would be the ones that would be able to answer that question.
Ma'am, it either is being enforced, it isn't being enforced, or you don't know if it's being enforced. That's my question. Which is
You would have to refer to Indigenous Services Canada to obtain a response to that question.
Mr. Chair, I believe that's my time, but can you put the question to the witness and insist that she provides a response? If she doesn't know, she doesn't know, but she should tell us she doesn't know. Is the requirement being enforced? I think I've asked the question 4 or 5 times now, and the witness has an obligation to answer it.
Ms. Paquette?
It would be the responsibility of Indigenous Services Canada to actually enforce that, and they're doing the audits and validation of this happening. And that's what I know. I don't know whether or not they are doing it, but I would say that that's their responsibility, and therefore they're doing it.
Maybe I can ask.
Okay, so she doesn't know if it's being enforced.
Yeah. Does PSPC, maybe I can just ask for Mr. Genuis, does PSPC not have an oversight responsibility for that, considering it's purchasing?
Not in
And I'm
the
just trying to
Indigenous,
continue maybe-
not in the Indigenous Services, for the IBD list, we're not the ones responsible for validating or auditing that list.
The list or for purchases?
For the directory. So we're
Yes, sir,
responsible for procuring. We're not responsible for the directory, but we need to actually validate the
I
through the
apologize.
directory.
I just want to make sure we were getting the right question to you. I think we'll move on to Ms. Atwin now.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. Just a point of order though.
Sorry, Ms. Atwin. Just 1 second. Did that not answer the question as put forward, Mr. Genuis?
I understand that they don't maintain the list, but it's a question of whether a rule around subcontracting is enforced. That is a responsibility that should follow the procurement department, and the witness is saying she doesn't know, which is.
So I guess the question is the rules being enforced around subcontracting, not the list, but the actual contracting rules being followed for subcontracting?
So Indigenous Services Canada are responsible for the PSIB. They are responsible for the definition. So the companies that they have in their directory would actually follow that. The subcontractor or the 33% is still under their purview to investigate.
They are following the rules or not is Indigenous Services and PSPC would not be aware.
Correct.
Okay. Thanks, Mrs. Atwin. Sorry for the delay there. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure that was a point of order on the last one, but I'll move on. I also just want to clarify that Indigenous Services Canada does not verify any subcontracting. It's up to the contracting departments. But Ms. Paquette, I'd love to ask you, actually, perhaps for the Director General. My first question would just be, what is Procurement Assistance Canada's mandate?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Procurement Assistance Canada has the mandate to work with businesses to help them better understand how to navigate federal procurement. We also have an increased focus on working through with Indigenous businesses to enhance and to drive forward with economic reconciliation. So essentially, we have a network of regional offices across the country that are able to work directly on the ground with businesses and with partners to help us get the message out and to identify businesses that need assistance. And through various webinars, through various events, we try to provide them with contacts and information that they need to be able to navigate and to potentially have success in federal procurement.
Great. And through that work, can you speak to any of the specific barriers to participation in federal procurement?
Yeah, there are certainly the Government of Canada. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Government of Canada certainly is working to ensure that federal procurement continues to remain fair, open, and transparent. And we do listen to the business community in terms of some of the challenges that they face. So we certainly are mindful of ways that we can simplify procurement. And that is something that we're certainly aware of. And in that context, we have been taking steps to make procurement more simple. One of the key things as well that we've been focusing on in terms of ensuring that there's availability of information that businesses need is that we've recently moved to launch Canada Buys, which is our platform that enables us to provide procurement opportunities. So we know availability of information critically important, but through Canada Buys, we're able to have a portal that is able to meet the needs of business. We know that just generally business, particularly small business, certainly just in general, will sometimes have challenges with financing and others, but we do know that if we put the information related to federal procurement and how it works, we can help provide them with opportunities to be ultimately successful. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And Ms. Paquette, in May of 2022, Indigenous Services Canada introduced a requirement for businesses to certify that they qualify as Indigenous businesses in order to register on the Indigenous Businesses Directory. Was PSPC consulted on this? And can you explain these requirements?
I do not know if we were consulted. We may have been, but I do not have that answer, sorry.
Okay. And do you know roughly how many businesses there are on the Indigenous Business Directory compared to how many total Indigenous businesses there are in Canada?
I do not know. Do you know?
Yeah, my understanding is that there's about 2,900 businesses on the IBD. Based on recent research, there are upwards of 60,000 Indigenous businesses across the country, but that's sort of the information that we have to work with at this moment.
Do you think that massive discrepancy prohibits departments from reaching that 5% target?
That's why we're trying to engage the Indigenous communities to try to actually get them to register on the Indigenous in the IBD, as well as register into Canada Buys so that they can actually increase their participation in our procurement activities.
Great. And as the administrator of the Indigenous Business Directive, what do you feel Indigenous Services Canada has to do in order to increase the registration of businesses and help all departments reach that 5% target?
They have started some engagement with various Indigenous communities to determine how they can increase the number of suppliers on there, or how they can validate it differently, or how it could be managed differently. But they are the ones managing that, and we're not necessarily involved in those discussions. Do you? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. President. I would also like to note as well that through Procurement Assistance Canada, we do work run quite a number of events across the country to raise awareness of the various lists that are available that Indigenous businesses should be mindful of. We also focus on encouraging registration of Indigenous businesses on Canada Buys to enable them to ultimately be able to do business with the Government of Canada. We do different kinds of events, including our we call them small business information expos. That's where we do bring the broader federal family together in one location, and we invite different businesses. We focus on the Indigenous business community on occasion, and that gives them an opportunity to find out which programs are available. We do often invite our counterparts from Indigenous Services Canada, so they're able to directly speak with Indigenous businesses and to explain what is needed. We also do buyers expos where we provide opportunities for businesses to talk to buyers and to answer some of the questions. So we're doing a pretty significant outreach, and when there are opportunities for an Indigenous business to get to the point perhaps where they're able to enter into a contract, we do want to make sure that they're made aware of the importance of being as part of the IBD in order to ensure that the Government of Canada is moving toward the 5% target. Thank you.
Excellent. And just to be clear, does PSBC play any role in the initial verification of a business's ability to meet the eligibility requirements to be listed on the Indigenous Business Directory and business's ongoing eligibility?
No, we do not.
Okay. Thank you very much. And just with my remaining time, I encourage everyone, all committee members and members of Parliament, to do a search through the Library of Parliament to find out those Indigenous businesses in your riding and how we can support them. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thanks, Mrs. Atwin. We'll go to Mrs. Vignola, please, for 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, Ms. Paquette. Thank you for being with us today. My first question is as follows. We've been talking about Indigenous business, the Indigenous Business Directory. Can you tell us where we're at with the transfer of the directory? Indigenous Services Canada is responsible for this, and so I do not have information on where we're at. Thank you. We heard at committee multiple times, and businesses have told us that the public contracting process is difficult, and yesterday we heard that receiving certification took 2.5 years. What explains the reason for why this certification process is so lengthy? Is 2.5 years normal? If so, anyone would be discouraged from working with the federal government. Thank you for the question. Again, we are not a part of the validation process. I don't know how long it took and the kind of information that was exchanged between the business and the government. I'm speaking generally. The certification process overall, is it normal that it takes 2.5 years? How long should this process take? I don't have this information. Perhaps my colleague can answer? Thank you, Mr. Chair. Unfortunately, I cannot speak to how much time this took, but one of our mandates is to work with businesses to help them better understand requirements. Thank you. Who is responsible for determining the certification process for those who can be awarded contracts by the federal government? For Indigenous businesses, that would be Indigenous Services Canada. For other businesses, well, any business can receive a contract and can be registered on Canada Buys. But if measures are put in place to target Indigenous businesses without the certification, businesses that are not certified by ISC would not have access to those measures for Indigenous businesses. All right, so we have to ask the question to ISC. I understand. What is the government doing to ensure that public contracting is accessible to small businesses, especially small Indigenous businesses. I will give the floor to my colleague to respond. Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of our goals and
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, hold on a sec. Sorry,
I'm not
go ahead, Mr.
I'm
Rogers.
not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure what the interpreters are hearing, but I'm getting an awful lot of crackling noise in my headset. I'm not sure if it's my headset or if it's other people are hearing that.
Anyone else experiencing any crackling? I'm hearing perfectly fine.
Well, I hadn't been, I can tell you, for the last 5 minutes.
We will, hold on 2 seconds. We'll suspend for a second.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to our witnesses for their patience with our technical challenges. I think this may have been covered in the opening introduction, but listening to the responses, our witnesses have deferred many of the questions to Indigenous Services Canada. And so I wonder if you could very briefly sum up PSPC's role with regard to Indigenous procurement, separate from the role of Indigenous Services Canada.
So our role is to actually meet the 5%. So trying to incorporate certain measures within our contracts or to encourage in our contracts the participation of Indigenous businesses in participating in bidding in our contracts, because we need to meet the 5% target, and we're doing a lot of engagement to do that. We will have discussions with our clients, either client departments or within PSPC, on how they could incorporate Indigenous businesses in what they are requiring, either directly or as a subcontractor to the prime, by developing some plans. And so that's really our role, is to actually develop tools, develop clauses that will encourage Indigenous businesses to participate in our contracts. And then we help our client departments, which is not always PSPC. We help other departments as a common service provider, and we will encourage them as well to incorporate Indigenous participation in their particular requirements and in their contracts.
So if I understand the division of labor correctly, Indigenous Services Canada is responsible entirely for the determination of what constitutes an Indigenous business, the criteria, and the registration of those businesses in the directory. And PSPC takes that as accurate and tries to ensure that as many contracts as possible go to businesses that are so registered in order to meet the 5% target. Now, this committee study has pointed to really serious and troubling discrepancies and situations that question the integrity of that process. Has PSPC ever raised concerns about ISC's certification process and the directory, and the possibility of fraud or misrepresentation in that list of Indigenous businesses?
We are supportive of Indigenous Services Canada, and they are setting the rules, the definitions by which we need to follow, and therefore we would have discussions on how best we would be able to incorporate more Indigenous business in our procurement. And through PAC, we also make sure that there's good communication with Indigenous businesses or Indigenous representation, and they then have those discussions directly with Indigenous Services Canada.
But my understanding is that one of PSPC's roles is to ensure the overall integrity of government procurement. And so, it's been obvious to many people that there are serious and systemic problems with the Indigenous procurement process. Has PSPC conveyed any of those concerns to the client departments that you work with?
I'm not aware of that. As I said, they're responsible for the Indigenous Services Canada and the IBD list, and we follow that list. When we put a contract in place, and our 5% target can only be accounted through that particular, using that particular list. So if a company is not registered on the IBD, then it does not count against our 5% target.
So PSPC has never expressed concern about the integrity of the list or the use of shell companies, any of these really troubling concerns that have been raised over the course of this study?
Our responsibility is to actually have discussions through Procurement Assistance Canada with Indigenous firms, and they provide some information, and then we make sure that they are in contact with Indigenous Services Canada, and those discussions are happening over there, not with PSPC.
I guess it just seems unusual because in our discussions with PSPC about procurement more broadly, PSPC has taken a very proactive role when it comes to the integrity of government procurement, to ensure that fraud isn't taking place, to ensure that there are checks and balances along the way. And it seems like with Indigenous procurement, PSPC takes a very hands-off approach and really defers to Indigenous Services Canada when it comes to the registration of businesses. Is that a fair characterization?
Indigenous Services Canada set the rules, the definitions, and they do own the IBD, and they're the ones that are managing the PSIB program. the departmental oversight branch, who is responsible for the integrity of the procurement. We have certain clauses within our contracts, and there are certain rules. And before putting a contract in place, we have to go through a departmental oversight branch to validate that a company meets the integrity measures set by our departmental oversight branch. And then we also have clauses in our contracts that, the code of conduct, the conflict of interest, so that if ever something does come about, we have ways to remedy our contracts, either through termination or other means.
But those integrity measures do not include the question of whether they are indeed an Indigenous business. Is that correct?
I believe so. I believe so.
Okay. So Procurement Assistance Canada is going out there and trying to recruit Indigenous businesses and get them to register with the directory, et cetera. In British Columbia, can you highlight Procurement Assistance Canada's work in Northwest BC specifically?
We're a bit past our time. If you have a brief response, otherwise we can get to it in the next round.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. I would say that we do events throughout Canada, and we do focus on BC, and we work very closely with regional partners to make sure that Indigenous businesses are made aware of the services and that we can help them be ready to participate actively in federal procurement. And we have had successes in terms of Indigenous businesses participating. Thank you.
Thanks very much. We'll now go to Mrs. Block for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I guess I'm just going to start by reconfirming what I think I've heard in the testimony from our witnesses this morning when it comes to the role of PSPC and the Indigenous set-aside. I guess what I've heard is that the procurement department for the Government of Canada, PSPC, has testified that you do not have any oversight of a list of vendors which are required to meet certain criteria to qualify for the Indigenous set-aside. And yet we know that various departments have the authority to award contracts. And yet it would seem that every time PSPC, and we've seen this over the last couple of years, as we've undertaken various scandals, I would say, within the Government of Canada and procurement, that glaring mistakes have been made. And that has resulted in the government misspending tens of millions of dollars. Under whose authority are departments given the ability to award contracts directly?
That would be the Treasury Board Secretariat, who outlines the policy. So they're responsible for the directive on managing procurement, or on the management of procurement.
Okay. Thank you. So after widespread reports of abuse and fraud and the use of shell companies, is PSPC at all curious about getting to the bottom of it?
As I said, PSPC is through Procurement Assistance Canada, continues to have discussions with various Indigenous businesses, listens to what they have to say, and then we'll refer them to the right area within Indigenous Services Canada to make sure that they are aware of any issues and they can actually work through some of their own policies that are directing us to have 5% target within PSPC of our procurement to Indigenous firms.
Right. So you're directed to have a 5% target, and yet you are not responsible to ensure that that target is actually being met by businesses actually going to Indigenous, by contracts going to Indigenous businesses. So PSPC is not prepared to step in to deal with the failures of this program and ensure that money meant for Indigenous businesses is actually going to go to Indigenous businesses. Is that what you're telling us here today?
What I'm telling you is that Indigenous Services Canada are responsible for the PSIB program. They are responsible for the IBD, and they are working with Indigenous communities to manage the IBD, possibly make changes to the IBD, but it is PSPC must follow the rules set by TBS as well as ISC with relations to the 5% target to put some of their contracts in place for with Indigenous firms.
With all due respect, I believe that PSPC does have a responsibility to ensure that taxpayers' money is being spent effectively and efficiently. And if I was seeing reports about this kind of abuse within a program, I would certainly be sounding the alarm and trying to figure out how this could be addressed. I want to get back to the issue of subcontracting. Recently, the Procurement Ombudsman launched a broad review of government procurement, specifically on the practice of bait and switch. Now, this follows on the heels of revelations that your department has allowed companies to engage in the bait and switch with the resources working on their contracts with no repercussions. We talked a little bit about subcontractors earlier in response to some of my colleagues' questions. If you are not monitoring the subcontractors, how can we trust that this program, which is supposed to award contracts to Indigenous businesses, is actually working the way it's meant to?
So in our procurements, when we have a prime contractor, we are incorporating certain measures, or the prime contractor is who we have a contract with, and they have subcontractors, and they are obligated to incorporate the similar type of measures for the subcontractor as they do in their prime contract with the Government of Canada. But we do not manage subcontractors at PSPC.
Thank you very much.
And I believe that's a problem.
Thanks very much.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Baines, we'll go over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for to our department officials for joining us today. I'm just, I know there's been a lot of discussion around the business directory of Indigenous Peoples Partners, and do you think transferring the directory away from Government of Canada will lead to more integrity in procurement practices?
I would not be able to answer that. I don't
Okay.
know.
In the way, in the current context, would it be harder for Indigenous businesses to be competitive with non-Indigenous businesses when bidding for contracts if they were restricted to, say, a narrower pool of resources to draw from?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So if let's say the business directory is managed outside, organized outside, like, and would they have less resources from, say, the Government of Canada having the business directory, managing the business directory, or at least, adding members to it or not?
So I would not be able to answer that question. I don't know the workforce behind managing the IBD within Indigenous Services Canada, and I don't know how they would, if other firms were involved in the registration, how that would be managed. And those are discussions and questions probably best answered by Indigenous Services Canada, actually.
Okay. I'm going to go into the supply manual. The PSPC supply manual states, in support of PSIB, client departments may designate that a proportion of subcontracts through open procurement be reserved for Indigenous business, or that non-Indigenous suppliers are to be encouraged through the use of incentives. An example is additional evaluation points to hire Indigenous businesses as subcontractors. Can you explain to us what evaluation points are in the contracting process?
So when we develop a procurement or a request for proposal, we will outline how we will evaluate a supplier. And various points are associated with meeting certain criteria. And as long as a company is able to outline those criterias and how they will meet them, and we will associate certain points to them meeting those particular criteria. So we have to be fully transparent on how we're going to evaluate the bids so that it is fair, open, and transparent to all bidders.
Okay, and there's a set number of extra evaluation points that can be awarded for hiring an Indigenous subcontractor?
I think it's a plan that they would incorporate in their contract, or they may have, so yes, there could be some points provided for having a subcontractor being an Indigenous firm.
And they're awarded by PSPC or the contracting department?
So the PSPC, when it's a common service provider, can do that on behalf of other government departments, or for PSPC when we purchase on our own, when PSPC is a client of the acquisitions program.
Okay. The prime contractor is responsible to bind its subcontractors in writing to PSIB requirements, including requirements for the subcontractors to send information substantiating its compliance with the program. So who's responsible for enforcing these requirements? The prime contractor, ISC, or PSPC?
So the enforcement, I believe, would be done by Indigenous Services Canada. We can always ask them to audit to make sure that what has been identified in the evaluation, and then when we were providing the contract, if we require a validation, we would go to Indigenous Services Canada to do the audit.
Okay, so what measures are in place to ensure that all involved parties comply to these prerequisites? What actions taken if a prime contractor or subcontractor does not meet the requirements set out?
Brief answer, because we're past our time.
Okay, so there are some contractual clauses, and if they are not meeting it, then at that point, those contractual clauses would actually come into play, and you either terminate or you actually provide, like there might be remedies outlined in the actual procurement itself.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Baines. We'll now go to Mrs. Vignola, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Paquette, regarding the report on achieving the 5% goal for 2022-2023, there's about $1.6 billion given to Indigenous businesses. This represents 6.27% of contracts. How much is being spent on contracts on average in Canada for all businesses? I believe that for the federal government, that's about $36 billion per year, or 34 perhaps. And we have 24 billion at PSPC. If I do some quick math here, I'll be nice. $2 billion out of $36 billion, 5.5%. And I was generous. I added 400 million. We're not at 6.27% of contracts. I believe that we're mixing the amounts awarded for these contracts with the number of contracts. Is that possible? If you're speaking to what's in my report, I'm only talking about contracts for PSPC. When I spoke of the $34 billion, that was throughout the federal government at large. $24 billion is for PSPC, but it's also when contracts are awarded to other departments. Yes, that I had understood. We had 2.6% of our contracts that were awarded to Indigenous businesses in 2022-2023. That's at PSPC. But this policy applies to all organizations, not only PSPC. It applies to all organizations, but for some, including PSPC, there were some that started in 2022. There are organizations that started later than that. So we have 3 years from 2022 to the end of 24-25 to reach that target of 5%. I can only speak to PSPC and how we are working hard in order to reach that 5% and perhaps have more even than 5% going to Indigenous businesses. I'm talking about the difference between the number of contracts and the value of the contracts. Currently, we're looking at the value of contracts or for the number of contracts, because that's very different. I know my time is up, Mr. Chair. We're talking about the value.
Have a quick response, or would you like to get back to us in the next round?
I think it's on the value of the contracts from what I've read. So I would say that it's on the 5% target is related to contract value and not the number of contracts.
Okay. We'll go to Mr. Bachrach, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Piquet, the 5% target, but there remain serious concerns regarding the integrity of the business directory. Have you really met the target?
We have not met the target within PSPC, which I actually mentioned in the opening remarks. And what we are doing right now is a lot of effort through engagement with Indigenous businesses to see how we can actually meet that target, how we can, find out a little bit more about where they're able to procure or be part of our procurement processes, how we can actually direct more of our procurements toward Indigenous firms.
I guess maybe my question wasn't clear enough. It just seems like the 5% target is a box ticking exercise because PSPC does not have any concerns with the integrity of the directory or the definition of what an Indigenous business is. It just takes holus bolus, whatever Indigenous Services Canada says is an Indigenous business, and tries to hit the target based on that list. Now, I think you would agree with me that if you hit the 5% target for Indigenous procurement, but the businesses that get the contracts aren't necessarily Indigenous businesses, you haven't really hit the target, have you?
We are following the rules set by the government to meet a 5% target. If we actually exceed that, we'll be happy about that. We are abiding by the rule that the IBD certifies these companies, and we need to use the IBD to identify the 5%.
Yeah, and the challenge here, of course, is that there are major questions about the IBD, and those have been raised consistently over the course of this study. But it seems to me that PSPC is not concerned at all with the integrity of the directory. You're simply staying in your lane and ticking the box and trying to get to 5%, which, is frustrating because the role of PSPC, as I understand it, is to ensure the integrity of government procurement generally across the federal government. And it does seem in this case like PSPC is not fulfilling that role. But I'll move to the statement earlier in the last round that
Mr. Bachrach, I'm afraid we're
Yes.
we're past time, but you'll have another round. So
Okay.
if we can get
Thanks,
next
Mr.
round.
Chair.
Mrs.
Take
Block,
care.
please.
Thank you, Chair. Just to follow up on my previous round, you have kept saying that this program is run by Indigenous Services and that you have no oversight of the program. However, PSPC is required to award 5% of contracts per year to Indigenous businesses through this program, and has a requirement of that program 33% of subcontractors must be Indigenous. Why then is PSPC not verifying that this subcontracted work is being done by Indigenous businesses?
We refer the information to Indigenous Services Canada, and they can perform audits to ensure that the companies are meeting the requirements and maintain their certification.
And then do you receive these audited reports back to confirm that you are actually meeting the 5% target?
We would receive those reports back by Indigenous Services Canada and incorporate them in our files.
So I would just say that by not verifying the work being done by subcontractors, you are virtually admitting that your department is opening this program to fraud. When fraud is committed in government contracting, such as a business posing as an Indigenous business to win a contract, is PSPC the department that is responsible for getting back the money once that company has been exposed as not being Indigenous?
There are some contractual terms that manage the contract. If we have if something happens and a company who was previously certified and they actually met the certification, but yet no longer meet the certification once we've actually awarded the contract and the contract is still live, then the contractual clauses and terms and conditions of that contract will come into play.
So you could then get the money back.
I would not be able to say that we're going to get any money back. It all depends. You know, they meet the certification at the time we put the contract in place. If at any time, once we've put the contract in place, a company no longer meets the certification and we terminate at that time, then they have done the work during that time and we owe them the money for the work that they've done.
So in relation to the Arrive scam scandal, PSPC stated that they could get the money back from fraudulent contracting. I am not sure what you mean by a company meeting the certification when you award the contract and then somewhere along the line not meeting the certification along the way if it has been verified that they are an Indigenous business. But my question to you would be, can your department commit to reviewing the contracts awarded through this program and recovering any money spent on contracts awarded to non-Indigenous businesses that were posing as Indigenous?
I'm unable to answer that question because I don't know.
Okay, you don't know if you can do that. We heard testimony yesterday about performative reconciliation. If the Liberal government is not recovering money, referring to the RCMP and implementing measures to ensure contracts actually go to First Nation communities, is the Trudeau government guilty of performative reconciliation?
It's not something I'm able to answer. Sorry.
Okay, thank you very much.
That is our time. Mrs. Atwin, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just broadly, so the 5% procurement target is considered a minimum, correct, rather than a maximum value?
Correct.
So what are the best practices undertaken by organizations that exceed that 5% target?
So I don't know their best practices. I know that we are trying to develop best practices, and we are aiming to increase the number of Indigenous firms that are participating in our contracts by either directing, making sure that Indigenous firms are part of the discussion we're having with other government departments when we're looking at their requirements, so that we could possibly direct it or put different measures in place to ensure that Indigenous businesses actually participate in our procurement activities.
And just through your opinion, your expertise, as you've been in this role, do you think this 5% target is a good thing, and that it's fostered that economic reconciliation that we've been trying to achieve?
Yes, I think it is a good thing, and we are, we do want procurement to be part of that, to help from an economic perspective, the Indigenous communities, help through training, increasing jobs, and the more that there is participation in the federal government contracts, I think the more Indigenous firms will participate in more and more of our contracts and will have some success. So I think the 5% is a start.
Great. And have you heard about personally, any evidence of wrongdoing or misrepresentation by Indigenous businesses listed on the Indigenous Business Directory?
I have not. And I think that, if there is something, I would strongly suggest that Indigenous Services Canada be communicated with, and they will have to look into it, because that is their role. I don't know, Clinton?
Yeah, no, I would agree. Thank you, Mr. President. I would also just add, in terms of the best practices point which you raised, which is really important. We found that working very closely with Indigenous communities are very important. They're able to help us identify businesses that could be best suited for certain procurements. We've certainly seen that through our work in the north of Canada, for example, with the Inuit. We work very closely with some of the economic development organizations that are rooted in the community. So working with partners that are from the community, critically important, and those departments that are establishing those connections are having success. And also from our side, in terms of the Government of Canada side, getting ahead of the curve in terms of identifying those procurements that would be well placed for Indigenous participation, getting out to the communities, talking to the businesses, finding out if they're comfortable with what they need to do to be able to actively compete. One of the terms that we use, we want to get businesses able to be bid ready. And so that's where some of the work that we'll do with Indigenous firms will come into play. So if we get early notice, working with some departments and give us that kind of advance, we can get out, identify the community partners, work with the businesses that could be well placed, and make sure that when the actual procurement hits the street, we're going to have success. And we've had success in every region in terms of Indigenous firms that we can speak to that have been successful. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. I guess what I'm alluding to as well is that there's some broad claims being made in some of the preambles to the questions being asked by some of my committee members. And I'm just wondering if they know something more than we know, as far as, which businesses are we talking about as far as those that are non-compliant, or like there's evidence that we need to uncover, and I don't think that we've done that. And so I really thank you for what you've been able to bring to the table today is with regards to broad procurement policy and what PSBC is doing on their side to really encourage that participation for Indigenous businesses. I love hearing about the outreach, the networking, visiting communities, specifically those remote locations. All of that is critically important, and I think it speaks to the role that to the mandate that the government has put forward in that very important relationship that we have with Indigenous peoples, and having economic reconciliation be just a key pillar of that. So I'm just grateful for the discussion today, and thank you very much for being here.
Thanks, Mrs. Alwyn. We'll go to Mr. Lawrence. Welcome back to OGO, Mr. Lawrence.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And I must admit, I'm not a normal member of this committee, and I've been sort of watching this with some awe. at the lack of accountability with respect to your department, Ms. Paquette. Could you tell me if you feel your department is doing an adequate job detecting irregularities and even fraud within Indigenous procurement?
We put contracts in place, and if the contracts are for delivery of services or for goods, and as long as those services and those goods are delivered, that is the main concern. If a company is certified by the Indigenous Services Canada and they've met the certification requirements of Indigenous Services Canada, there is no fraud, as you've pointed out, and they are delivering their services or their goods to either PSPC or another government department.
Can you tell me how many contracts specifically dealing with Indigenous procurement that your department has stopped because of unfulfilling contractual obligations that your department has put out?
I don't have that information.
Could you provide that information to our committee?
If we have that information, yes.
So you may not have the information as to how many contracts have been stopped because of individuals not fulfilling or companies not fulfilling their obligations. That's possible.
We will provide the information. I don't know if we have it specifically stated that way. There are various. Anyways, we will look into it.
Okay. You mentioned earlier that you have not hit the 5% target. That's correct?
Correct.
Yeah. Thank you. My fault. Yeah. A little delay there in the translation. But, where are you at? What percentage are you at right now? So
we hit 2.7% in 22-23. And we had 3.4% or 143 million in 23-24. And I do not have the numbers for 24-25, but my understanding is a lot of the efforts through the engagement and increased participation in different activities in our procurement, we're getting close to our target of the 5%. But I don't have the number yet for this year because the year's not finished.
Excuse me, my apologies for over talking there to the translators. But have those numbers ever been audited?
I don't know. I would have to validate that. What do you mean by validate? Like audited? We have identified, so the companies that have been certified by IBD would be part of these contracts, and those contracts constitute the numbers we're able to identify towards the 5%.
So the question I'm looking at is was raised by Mr. Bachrach, is that these numbers, any number won't really matter if they're not stood up with a rigor. And so I'm just wondering if any independent review has been done, or even within the department to see whether the procurement is occurring in accordance with yourselves as well as Indigenous services as well.
So the contract itself, we would be managing whether the contractor is delivering the good or service and they're meeting the requirements of the contract. The company would have been certified by the Indigenous Services Canada, be part of the IBD. That certification and the validation through the IBD allows us to actually give a contract to that company and count them against the 5% target.
So has your department stopped any contracts because of an issue with certification?
Not that I'm aware of. We would have to look into that.
Thank you. That is our time. Maybe you can get back to us in writing with that. Yes. Mr. Baines for 5 minutes, please, and then we'll finish up with Mrs. Vignola and Mr. Bachrach. Go ahead, Mr. Baines.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We received in previous meeting, we received a letter to the committee um, from one of the organizations, and it indicated that with an effective Indigenous procurement system in place, the government could make tremendous steps forward toward economic reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. So, what is, in your view, what is the significance of achieving economic reconciliation in Canada?
Thank you, Mr. President. I would say that economic reconciliation is critically important. It's important for Indigenous communities, and it's also an opportunity for them to be able to actively participate in federal procurement. We know that we're talking about quite significant numbers in terms of the level of procurement activity. And if we look at that sort of 5% target, and it's probably been mentioned, but we do look at it as a floor, not a ceiling. If you're able to really achieve that success, then we're talking about significant levels of investment that are going to be able to go into Indigenous communities, and it would be evident that the impact would be transformational. So we think it's critically important to really drive forward and see if we can make this target a reality. And as mentioned, we are working with partners. We're working with businesses. It's a collective Government of Canada effort. But if we're able to really make progress towards that 5%, it will have changes. I know that at the level of an individual enterprise level, when I work with or when our team rather works with a business, like for example an Indigenous business called Create a Fire, who does really amazing work in the communication space, and they've been working with our teams in Procurement Assistance Canada. They were able to apply to some of our instruments and fortunately get some success. And they certainly know that in terms of their business model, it's been quite incredible in terms of being able to increase the number of staff and able to have more of an impact. So we can see positive impacts at the firm level, and we think at the community level as well. So in my view, economic reconciliation is critically important. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And yeah, so like I can talk a little bit about locally here. Boeing in Richmond, British Columbia, made a significant investment of over $40 million, and one of the suppliers that was brought on to provide fabrication of machinery and national defense parts and supplies for our submarines was also one of the recipients, and I think that we've seen significant benefits here locally here in our region. Maybe if you can maybe expand a little bit about how ensuring procurement opportunities for Indigenous businesses help achieve economic reconciliation in Canada, and speak about if you've witnessed, we've talked a lot about the 5% target, but if you've witnessed anything in your departments where we've exceeded that 5% minimum threshold.
So I can actually give one example. So Atlantic Science Enterprise Center project. Within that actual procurement context, there are two large contracts for the Atlantic Science Enterprise Center project, which include Indigenous participation. And through those two particular contracts in particular, we were able to exceed the 5%. I don't have the actual total value of the contract, but so far through their efforts, the contractors, those two contractors have provided close to $60 million through subcontracting with Indigenous businesses. And so that's a good news story. We also know that through the Canadian Dental Care Plan, Sun Life did have
I'm afraid that is our time. I have to cut you off because we're running short of time. Mrs. Vignola, please go ahead.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Beckett, I'd like to come back to what you just said and subcontractors. Some have already mentioned that there are Indigenous businesses that could be shell companies for non-Indigenous businesses. We've heard that sometimes it is necessary to go through a non-Indigenous business, but in your calculations on the value of contracts, when an Indigenous business is subcontracted, do you factor in the entirety of the contract or only the percentage awarded to that business? That is a great question. I don't have the answer, but I believe that it would be with the subcontracting company that would be a part of the 5% and not the entirety of the contract. We can only factor in the subcontractor if they're part of the directory, and that would be the value that could be included in the 5%, but I would need to verify this. If you could send us the answer in writing, that would be great. I'd like to come back on the report on the 5% targets. In 2022-2023, it stated that 28 organizations had not met the target of 5%. What is PSPC's role in supporting organizations in reaching that goal? That's my first question. And secondly, are there any consequences if one does not meet the goal of 5%? This goal was created by Indigenous Services Canada, not PSPC. We want to develop tools. For example, supply arrangements. So we develop those tools, and we can help with that because there are pools where Indigenous businesses would be part of them, and departments could look in there to use those businesses to meet their goals.
Time. Mr. Bachrach, if you could finish off the day for us, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll pick up where I left off with my last round of questioning. Our witness from Procurement Assistance Canada indicated that his organization works closely with regional partners, and I'm curious in the Northwest BC context if he could share with us some of those partners that his organization has worked closely with.
No, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. With our organization, we do work with local organizations. One of our key partners that we do work with is the Canadian Association Native Development Officers. But in terms of directly with BC through our regional office, we do make sure that we're connecting locally with communities. If there was a requirement to maybe provide a list of some of the specific organizations that we've worked with, I'd be pleased to provide that.
Your regional office in British Columbia is located in Vancouver, correct?
That is correct.
Vancouver is the biggest city, the biggest urban center, and it's a long ways away from the region that I represent. I'm just curious whether you work with Pacifican, which has offices in Northwest BC, or with any local rural partners that are able to work on the ground with Indigenous businesses in more rural parts of the province.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for that question. One of the models that we do, and it is actually widely implemented in BC and across the country. So I mentioned before that one of our key Indigenous partners is CANDO, Canadian Association of Native Development Officers, and it kind of speaks to the point that you raised. We don't have the full reach on the ground everywhere. So what we do with this association or this grouping, they are economic development professionals, and they are situated in the regions. So with this partnership, which is unique, we actually work with them. We share our learning instruments, our tools, and we basically teach them how to deliver the kinds of support that we do. So through working with CANDO, we're able to have individuals, in many cases, Indigenous economic development organizations in the regions, able to work directly with the businesses that are close at hand. One of the things that we've been doing as well, too, we've certainly been making use of distance technology and virtual to connect with our partners, but sometimes that doesn't always have the exact impact. So we'll start with virtual to establish contacts, and we will make the trip when it's necessary to actually be on the ground and present with partners. We know that there is a value in being able to deal with someone face to face. And then just to sort of pick up on the point that I think you alluded on, we do work very closely with the regional development agencies to leverage their expertise. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I just note that CANDO is located in Alberta, is based in Alberta. So I'd be keen to know more about their activities in British Columbia, specifically Northwest BC. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Bachrach. Thanks, everyone, for bearing with us as we dealt with our IT issues. IT folks here today, thanks for your assistance as well, getting us going. Ms. Paquette, Mr. Lawrence White, there were a few questions left outstanding. We asked for them in response in writing. Our committee has passed a motion. We require all responses within 21 days of today, lest you be invited back. Colleagues, thank you very much. We will see you Tuesday.